Today's daf we're going to learn is Beitzah Kafhe. This is the daf for Shabbat. Today's daf is dedicated to Judith Monk, Zichrona Levrcha, by her children, Yomi, Samuel, Karen Frolich, Mati Monk, and families on her first year at site, 19th of Tishrei. Judith was born in Hungary, survived the Holocaust with only her mother, and moved to England after the war. She was intelligent, kind, and knowledgeable in many different topics. She loved learning Torah and attending thought-provoking Shiur. She would be proud to know that her children learned Daf Yomi this year. Keeping mitzvot was important to her, and she excelled particularly at Kibbud Ein, looking after her mother until she passed away at 98. She is sorely missed. Okay, today's daf, we're going to first start off with the topic of capturing animals, continuing in with where we started this chapter. And then after that, we're going to move on to a new topic about slaughtering animals on Yantif and things that are permitted within that and some other issues related. So we're going to start right now at the top of Kaf He Amud Aleph. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna Amar Rav. Hasocher amat hamayim me'erev Yom Tov, ulemachar hishkim umatza badagim mutarim. If you dam up a river or some sort of body of water, and you do it before Yantif, and you come the next morning and you find fish there, right? You already stopped up the water. The fish were already captured in that space. So therefore, you're allowed to take the fish and eat them on Yantif, because they're not what we call mechusar Seidah. They're not really missing an action to capture them. They're already kind of captured. Amar Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda now comments on what Rav Huna said, Rabba bar Rav Huna said, in the name of Rav. And he says, Midivrei Rabbeinu, Rabbeinu, he really means Rav, from what Rav said, Nilmod, Chaya shekinina b'pardes einat tzricha zimun. If you have an animal that goes into an orchard in order to give birth to a calf, or whatever it is, a baby, you don't have to designate that animal from before. That animal is what we call, again, mechusar tzeidah. That newborn animal is so small that it's within this orchard. There's no way he's going to be able to leave that orchard on Yantif. And therefore, it's going to be permitted for you to take that animal and capture it on Yantif, because it's not really called capturing. Amar Rav Nachman, Nafal Chavren beriv revata. Our friend has fallen in something great, meaning what a huge mistake. There's no way that's true. Igada Amre, some people say that it wasn't Rav Chisda who said it. It was Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Rabba the son of Rav Huna said it. Midivrei Rabbeinu nilmod chaya shekinina b'pardes einat tzricha zimun. Right, that if this animal kind of took it as its place to be in this pardes and give birth to an offspring there, you don't have to designate it from before, to which Amar Rav Nachman nafal bar Chavrin beriv revata. The son of our friend, because Rav Nachman and Rav Huna were contemporaries, the son, Rabba bar Rav Huna, has fallen into something great, meaning, right, big mistake, what you said. Why? Why does he disagree so much? He says, you can't derive from the fish case that if you dammed up a river or a lake or whatever it might be, because a lake doesn't really make sense, more like a river, a stream, you dammed it up, then, right, you find fish in the morning, that's very different. Why? In the dam case, you did an action to designate those fish, set them aside for you. There's also a muktzah issue here. Whereas with the animal, you didn't do anything. The animal came into the orchard on its own. You had absolutely nothing to do with it. So of course you would have to have zibun and show in some way that you intended to use this animal. Otherwise it's not going to work. So now the Gemara is going to question first from one side, then from the other. They're going to ask another question. This was one question on either Rav Chisda or Rabba bar Rav Huna. Now we're going to ask another question. V'lo baya zimun. Wait, it doesn't need zimun from before. Vahatanya, we see in a Braita, it says, Chayasha kinina b'pardes tzricha l'zamen. That's exactly our case. It says it needs zimun. You have to designate it from before. And not only that, there's some more cases, but that's already our question. V'tzipor drol, a free bird, a bird that flies everywhere. It doesn't have a base, a home base. Tzarich likshor b'knafeh kedei shelo titchalef be'ima. You have to tie something onto its wings before Yantif if you plan to slaughter it tomorrow, so that you don't confuse it with its mother or presumably with any other bird. And this is Shmaya Avtalyon testified about. So this is pretty clear. How could you then suggest either Rav Chisda or Rabba bar Rav Huna that it doesn't need zimun? So the Gemara answers, tiyuvta. In fact, this raises a serious question on what they said. But now the Gemara is going to go the flip side. Wait a minute. Umi baya zimun? Does it really need to be designated from before? The Hatanya, it says in a Beitzah, and here we're going to see the reverse of what we just saw. Amal Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, right? We keep seeing him all over the Masechet, where every time he has a different approach to the Machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel from what we saw before. Modim Beit Shammai uBeit Hillel al sheizminam betoch haken umatzah lefnei haken she'asurim. We've seen this before, right? This was more at the beginning of the Masechet when we talked about birds. That if you designated them when they were in the nest and then they flew away, he agrees that, right? And then you find a bird in front of the nest, asurim. You can't assume that was the same bird that was in the nest yesterday. But now, which type of birds are we discussing? We're now going to see that there's several different categories of birds. We saw a minute ago, tzipor dror, right? A free bird, flies everywhere. Now, this was talking about, and we'll see right now, the ones we mentioned in the beginning of the chapter, in the Masechet, which was Yonei Shovach, the Yonei Aliyah, those who are living in the dovecotes, or in a loft area, right, or some attic area. And birds that went into these holes that they would have in palaces, like walls with holes, indentations in them for the birds to go. Now, these we're talking about birds that live kind of in these places. They're not owned by the people whose houses they are, or walls they are, or whatever, or dovecotes, but they're not like tzipor dror, the fly everywhere, but they generally stay, right? They have their own kind of home, even though they're not really owned by anybody. So in that case, if you find it in the nest and then you find it out of the nest, it's forbidden because you don't know if it's the same bird. Aval, but when it comes to avazim, v'tarnagolim, v'yonei hardisiyaot, v'chaya shekinena b'pardes, mutarim ve'ein tzrichin zimun. But these categories of geese and roosters and birds that, doves that live as part of your household, okay, it's a type of bird, hardisiyaot, which are domesticated birds, or this undomesticated animal, but that went into the pardes, those are all mutarim ve'ein tzrichin zimun. They don't need designation from before. Now again, we're going to assume, although we'll see that they raise a question about this later, and we'll answer it, but the assumption is, commentators say this, Rashi says it, that we're talking about the vlad, the baby that's born from this animal. All of those don't need zimun. And now, again, that's our question. We could stop the Beitzah here, but since we brought it, we're going to bring the whole thing. But again, you see the reverse of what we just said before, and this would actually support what Rav Chisda and Rabbi Rochana said, but question the assumption that the Gemara made after bringing their answer and their opinion and then rejecting it. So now it continues though. But tzipor dror, now you have the opposite extreme. You have the ones who live at the house, you have the ones in the dovecotes, which are kind of in the middle, and then you have on the opposite extreme, you're going to have the birds that fly everywhere. This matches what we saw in the previous Beitzah, that you have to tie a string or something around it to make some indication that you plan to use it tomorrow. The ones that you either tied or you held it in your hand. Remember, we had that in the beginning of the Masechet also. You held it and kind of shook it in your hand to see, is this worthy or not? If they're found in cisterns or in houses or in ditches or in caves, mutarim. Once they're tied or you shook them and did something to them and you find them where you left them the next day, you're allowed because you already designated them. But it really depends where you find them. Be'ilanot, if it's in a tree, asurin, shema ya'alev yitzlosh. That's a separate problem. You can't get to the bird if he's in a tree because you're not allowed to use trees for any reason on Shabbat. You might go up and tear off a branch, and we're worried about that. Or on Yantif also, you're not allowed to. So you wouldn't be allowed to go, specifically, we're actually talking about Yantif. On Shabbat, it's also a problem, but Shabbat, you wouldn't be able to take the bird anyway because you can't slaughter it on Shabbat. V'hamakusharim, now they're just adding this other totally disconnected line, but it has to do with birds that are either tied up or that you shook. V'chol makom asurim mishum gezel. If you come across one of these birds, I wasn't the one who designated it, but I happened to find one of them. I see it has a little tag on it. This is on a regular day, not even on Shabbat. I'm not allowed to take that bird because it's stealing. Even though it was a free bird and it's up for grabs for anyone. If someone tied a string on it, it's clear, or they shook it. Now, shaking, how would I know? So the commentaries claim it must be that I watched the person shake the bird. Then I can't go claim it as my own. Obviously, only if I saw, otherwise, if I didn't see, how would I know? But I'd be obligated because of stealing. So it really belongs to you once you tie it. So again, we're back to our question. How could you say it needs zimun if here it says it doesn't need zimun? So Amar Nachman lo kashya haba habi'ima. The mother needs zimun because it's the kind that could run away. But the baby, the offspring, doesn't need, because the baby can't run away, it doesn't need zimun. To which the Gemara says, what are you talking about? You're mixing issues. Ima bezimun sagila, say the mal yata baya. No, the mother, the zimun is more like a muktzah issue. Did you designate it before or not? The mother, the difference between the mother and the offspring, the baby, is that the mother can run away. And it's an issue, right? Is the animal already considered captured from before? This mother can easily run out of the orchard. The child can't because it's too young, right? The baby animal, the calf or whatever it is too young. But the mother can run away. So that is a halachic issue of tzeidah, like we talked about in the beginning of the chapter. That you can't, the zimun is not going to help you just by saying, I want to capture that animal tomorrow. That doesn't help you. It has to be captured. It's not captured in the orchard. So it can't be one is the mother and one is the child, because even zimun wouldn't help you for that. They both must be talking about the offspring. When do you need zimun? When it wasn't designated by anyone from before. That means if it's near the city, if it was in a garden that was near the city, the orchard, then you can assume that people had in mind about this animal beforehand. But if it was far from the city, not anywhere near where people were, then we're going to assume nobody thought about this animal and it's totally muktzah and undesignated. And then it would need zimun. So that's how we explain the two seemingly contradictory Beitzah, that they're each referring to different situations. Starting with the new Mishnah now. So as I said in the beginning of class, we're going to move now from the issue of capturing to the next stage, which is slaughtering. When can you slaughter an animal? Obviously, if you want to eat the animal on Shabbos, on Yantif, you can slaughter it. Ochal nefesh. But what if you have a behema mesukenet? Lo yishchot ela im ken yesh shehut b'yom le'echol mimenu k'zayat tzli. If I have an animal that's about to die, now it's not a treifa, you'd have to assume. Treifa is certain things, there's certain conditions an animal might have that because of that, it will die within 12 months. We'll get to all of this in Chulin. And that animal is not going to be kosher, even if I did a kosher shechita. But I could have a regular animal that's not considered a treifa, but let's say it got very sick and is about to die. I want to save that animal from dying. Once it dies, it'll be a nevela, and I'll just be able to give it to my dogs. I want to eat it, so I want to slaughter it right away, so it won't be a loss for me. But let's say it's the end of Yantif and I don't have enough time to eat, or I don't need to eat any food. I don't need this food. Am I allowed to slaughter it on Yantif? And slaughtering is permitted, but only so long as I'm going to eat the meat. So they say, if there's enough time in the day to eat a kizayit, an olive bulk of the meat roasted, that means I'll have to be able to slaughter the animal, take the meat, right? Take off the skin, take the meat, roast it, and eat it. Okay, enough to eat a little bit. So if I have that amount of time, no problem. Rabbi Akiva Omer, afilu kazayit chai mi beit tfichata, he says it doesn't need to be roasted. Even if you take you can eat a kazayit, an olive bulk of raw meat. Okay, even though most people don't eat it raw, if you have enough time to eat some of the raw meat from the beit hashchita, they assume right now. We'll see later. Mar's going to raise a question, but maybe it means from where it's slaughtered, meaning from the neck. Take off a piece of raw meat and eat it. If you have enough time to do that, you can slaughter the animal. Shchata bisadeh lo yiviena. Now we're on a different issue. If you slaughter it out in the fields and you want to carry it into the city, the fields were always outside the city. You want to carry it into the city, can you? Well, lo yiviena b'motu b'motai. You can't use big poles like people, you imagine the way they always show the spies with those sticks on their backs and their satchels. They would take these big poles. One person would put it on their shoulder, next person on the other shoulder, right? Maybe 4 people carrying it. Can't carry the animal in that way. Okay, why we'll talk about in a second. You can carry parts of it, carry it by part. Okay, this seems to be what we call something that looks like something you would do on a regular weekday. Rashi says, because you carry it like that with a lot of people, it's avshamilta, it becomes public. And once it's public, people talk about it, and it just seems like something that would happen on a weekday. Now, this becomes a very gray area. What looks like something that one might do on a weekday, and we can't, and Rashi says, by the way, that it's going to cause zilzul yom tov, okay? Avshamilta always means it will be publicized. Umizalzal b'yom tov, and people will come to, it's a disgrace to Yom Tov because it looks like something you would do on a regular day. That's disgraceful to Yom Tov. We're going to talk about other things that come out there, and we're going to see it's a very gray area, as you can imagine. So the Gemara starts off with a seemingly disconnected thing, although it has to do with once you slaughter an animal. Amar Rabbi Bar Abba, hefshet v'nituach be'olah v'hu adin l'katzavim. When it comes to a korban olah, the Torah tells you that you have to take off the hide, the skin, and cut it up into pieces before you put it to burn on the altar. This is a burnt offering where all the meat gets burnt on the altar. Comes Rami Bar Abba and he says, just like there's hefshed and nituach for the korban olah, also for katzavim, also for butchers. In other words, when you slaughter the animal, after you slaughter it, you have to cut it up into pieces. Mikan limda Torah derech eretz. From here, the Torah teaches you derech eretz, okay, which we're going to have to see exactly what that means, right? The way of the world, that shelo yochal adam basal kodem hefshef nituach. You should always take off the hide first, cut it into pieces, and only after can you eat the meat. To which the Gemara said, which you're probably wondering, my kamashmalam, what is this coming to teach us? Maybe it's coming to say, I disagree with Rav Huna. What did Rav Huna say? Ta'amar Rav Huna, behema bechayeha bechazkat isur omedet ad shivada lecha b'men shchita. We're going to see this all throughout the Gemara. So what is this idea of chazaka? Something is considered one status. We're going to keep its status until we know otherwise. So when an animal's alive, it's not kosher. You can't eat an animal that's live. So therefore, until we know that it was properly slaughtered, right, we're going to assume this animal's not kosher. So if I find the animal, I see it's alive, then a few minutes later, I see it's dead. I can't assume that someone slaughtered it, right? I have to assume till I know it's slaughtered, it's not kosher, it stays in whatever status it was. However, he also says, nishchita, once it's slaughtered, if I know someone did a kosher shchita, or they did a shchita, let's say, they slaughtered it, we assume it's permitted until you find out that it was a treifa, meaning if I find out that the animal was slaughtered, I don't have to go checking. Was the animal sick and start doing like an autopsy on the animal and checking inside and cutting it up? And it seems like I can just assume that it was a kosher shchita unless someone tells me, oh, didn't you know that animal was sick? Right? I don't need to start worrying about it. In which case, what does he say when he says limda Torah derech eretz? It's not just derech eretz, it's teaching you a halacha that what? One has to do hefshei v'nituach. It's not just a good way to live, but one has to do this in order to check. Why would you do hefshei v'nituach? To look inside the body to see, is it a treifa? Maybe that's what Rami Bar Abba is saying. So now the Gemara says, v'ha'anantnan matnitin k'di Rav Huna. But how could you say Rami Bar Abba would say something against Rav Huna when Rav Huna seems to be implied from our Mishnah? How so? Or our Mishnah goes like Rav Huna. Ditnan, obviously Rav Huna came after, but it fits in with what Rav Huna said. It says in our Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva Omer, afilu kezayich chaymi beit v'chata. That means, right, as long as you have enough time to eat the raw meat that comes straight from where you slaughtered it from the net, meaning you don't have to do hefshei v'nituach, cutting it up, right, and flaying the skin, the hide and cutting it up. Clearly don't have to. My lab bi beit v'chata mamash, right? Doesn't it sound like it means by the net? So the Gemara says, "Lo, it doesn't mean that." Mimakom shetovachat achilata. It means from the place where it gets its. Okay, how exactly to describe this? Where the food gets absorbed in the body of the animal, which would be the stomach. In other words, you could take raw meat from inside the animal, which means after you've chopped it up into pieces, which would then fit with Rami Bar Abba. But then the Gemara is going to say, no, but it's very nice that you're suggesting that's a way to read it, but it's clearly not the right reading because Hatani Rabbi Chia, Makom Tvichata Mamash. Rabbi Chia had a version of the Mishnah that said explicitly, mikom tvichata mamash. It said right by the neck, which means you don't need Hafsheh B'nituach. So we're back to square one. What did Rami bar Abba mean? He obviously didn't mean it's forbidden to eat meat before you do Hafsheh B'nituach because you have to check for a treifa. No. Ela Rami bar Amma orach aga kamashman. He tried to teach us a good way to eat your meat. In other words, this is recommended by the etiquette committee. Okay, this is proper etiquette. Hilchot Derech Eretz in general there's, by the way, this whole section in the Shulchan Aruch called Hilchot Derech Eretz, and Hilchot, it's actually called Dvarim Hanoagim B'Seudah, which is really like etiquette issues. So that's what it means. Why would you not be able to eat it until you do have Hafsheh B'nituach? Kedetanya, as it says in the following Beitzah, Lo yochal adam shum ubatzal merosho ela me'alav. Don't eat garlic and onion. It sounds like they ate them whole in those days, right? We generally don't do this anymore, but sometimes I guess you could, but don't eat them whole from the bottom. Rosho is really it's really the bottom where the roots are from, right? The bottom, the way it grows. Ela me'alav. Take the leaves off and eat it like that. Don't eat it whole, really, what it's saying. Eat it from the leaves and peel them away. Ve'im achal, and if you did, what's the problem with this? Hareza ravtan, you look like you're ravenous. It's not right? Some people like go grab a whole, okay, we're going to see this with the meat, okay, right? It's the same thing with the meat. If you eat the meat without cutting it up into pieces, you eat it like, whole, the way it comes out of the animal, you look like you're gluttonous. It seems it's a very inappropriate way to do it. It's not proper etiquette. Okay, so that's why this issue is an etiquette issue. The Beitzah continues, Kayotsebo, likewise, lo yishta adam koso b'vat achat. Don't drink your whole cup in one gulp. V'im shata hareze gargaran. If you did, right, you go look again like you're a drunkard or something. Tanu Rabbanan, another Beitzah along these lines, specifically about drinking wine. Hashotek koso b'vat achat hareze gargaran. Same thing they said right before. Shnayim, if you drink it in two gulps. Derech Eretz, that's the appropriate, proper etiquette way. Shlosha migasei haruach. Already 3, you're arrogant, because then I'm drinking my wine very slowly. That's already arrogant. Okay, whether that would still be true today, it's all etiquette issues are dependent on custom and what people generally do, right? I don't think it's arrogant to finish a glass of wine in 3 or more sips. Okay, so now, V'amar Rami bar Chama, Rabbi bar Abba. Rami bar Abba now says a few other statements. Chatzuva, chatzav, which is a type of flower that they would grow, or a plant, you could say. It's a plant that they would grow. Its roots go straight down. Okay, this is what Rashi explains. The roots go straight down, and because of that, and they go very deep, people would use them as boundary markers between properties. So because of that, they say, Mikta raglehen derishia. It cuts off the legs of the evil people, because what are the bad people? The bad people try to steal. And the chatzav basically puts them in line. In other words, these are boundaries. They demarcate boundaries. And rishaim are people who can't keep to boundaries. Okay, we're going to see a whole list of things. These things are kind of teaching you lessons that some people just are unwilling to learn. So, right, the rishaim are people who can't stick within the boundaries and they steal things that aren't theirs. And the chatzav puts down the boundaries. Nitziah, planting trees, which when you plant trees, for the first 3 years, you can't eat the produce. That's not an easy thing to do, to wait around for 3 years till you can eat the produce that comes off your tree. So, nitziah mekater raglehon de katzavio duboalei nidot. This cuts off the legs of the butchers, the slaughterers, and the ones who sleep with their wives when they're menstruating. Why? What's the issue here? So Orla teaches you patience. And these people they don't have any patience. Who are the butchers? The butchers are the ones who are slaughterers who eat their meat right away. Now you see why he brings this up here, and don't do Hafsheh B'nituach. Again, this connects. This is Rami bar Abba, and this connects with what he said before. Don't, right? You have to do Hafsheh B'nituach. Otherwise, it looks like you have no patience and you're just eating it right away. And the Ba'alei Nidot are obviously people who can't wait for their wives to get out of Nida, right? To go to the mikvah, and they have no patience, and they go and they sleep with their wives before they go to the mikvah. Tormusa, okay, tormusa are lupines. These are a type of legume that they would have to cook 7 times before it became sweet. Then it has a sweet taste after you cook it 7 times, but it takes a long time to get to that. But in the end, it's worth it because they're very sweet. So cuts off the legs of the people who hate Israel, which is really a way of saying the Jewish people who went wayward. Okay, we don't want to say the Jews because it sounds bad, so we call them this enemies of the Jews, but it's really the Jews. It's what we call Lashon Sagina Hor, where you say the opposite. It's a euphemism. So how do we get this? What's the connection? Shenemal says it's a verse from Sefer Shoftim, the book of Judges. Vayosifu b'nei Israel asot hara b'nei Hashem. They continued in the bad way of the bad ways that were bad in the way of God and the eyes of God. Vayavdu. Now pay attention. I told you the tormasim that's cooked 7 times. We're going to see a reference to they worshiped idols, 7 different ones. Vayavdu et haba'alim, that's one. The eshtarot, ve'et Elohei Aram, the Aramean gods, ve'et Elohei Sidon, ve'et Elohei Moav, ve'et Elohei Bnei Ammon, ve'et Elohei Plishtim. They worshipped all these other gods. Vayazvu et Hashem v'lo avadu, and they left God and they didn't worship Him. So first the Gemara questions and says, Mimash shene'emar. Once you say Vayazvu et Hashem, they left God, Eini yodea shelo avadu. Obviously, then they didn't worship God. So matam ulomar lo avaduhu. So why does it say that? Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, afilu kitormus hazeh sheshokino to sheva pamim. Even like this tormus that you cook 7 times, v'ochlimoto b'kinuach seudah, and then you eat it for dessert. Lo aseuni banai. My sons didn't do this. Meaning, if it was like the tormus, what would it have done? It would have gone. The Jews would have worshipped idols, 7 different ones, and ultimately returned to God, just like the tormus ultimately becomes sweet. But they weren't even like the tormus. They were worse. They worshiped. They went off 7 ways, right? 7 different ways, and didn't come back to God. Tana Mishmei de Rabbi Meir. So now we're going to talk about, once we talk about the bad nature of the Jewish people, we bring a bright in the name of Rabbi Meir. Why did we get the Torah? Because they're very strong-willed, right? We always say, if they're stubborn, the Jews, right? We're very strong-willed, and we need the Torah to kind of keep us in place. Tana de Rabbi Yishmael. Here's a quote from a bright from the house of Rabbi Yishmael, but they're going to quote a pasuk from Ha'azinu, which we just read from the Torah last week. Mimino eish lamo. From the right, the Torah is a fiery Torah. Okay, what does this mean? Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, ru'uyin halalu. We're going to see a few different drashot on this. Ru'uyin halalu shetinaten lahem dat esh. These people are worthy to get a religion that is fiery because they're so tough. They need a fiery religion to kind of calm them down, keep them in place. Igad Amre, some people say, Datehem shel Elohesh. It doesn't say the Torah in that verse. It means their customs, or your customs. Like it comes up a lot in the Megillah Esther, Kadat, like the rules, okay? The customs, the ways of these people are fire. It's a very hard line to understand. Simple reading sounds like were it not for the Torah, no other nation would have been able to stand up to these people. They're so fiery, the Jewish people. But it sounds like the Torah, didn't allow them? So it seems to really be, some people explain it the opposite, that it means because of the Torah they received, they became able to conquer everyone else. It gave them the strength. And this is what Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, Shlosha azim hem. There's 3 that are very strong, that no one can stand up to them. Who is that? Yisrael ba'umot, the Jews among the other nations. Kelev b'chayot, the dog among all the other animals. And Tarnagol ba'ofot, okay, the rooster among all the other birds. V'yesh omrim, af ez b'behemah dakas. Some people say even a goat within all the small animals. V'yesh omrim, af tzelef b'ilanot. Some people say also the capers in the trees. The capers in the trees, a caper bush kind of grows everywhere and it's hard to stop. Like it goes in and out to all different places, right? These are showing when you can think about what all the other animals that they mentioned here, but they have a certain strength that the other animals don't have. Right? Maybe like an ability, we always talk about the Jewish people, right? A staying power that they seem to be outlast anything. Okay, now we're back to this last part of the Mishnah. And this is the last part for today. If you slaughter it in the field, you can't carry it on these poles. Tanu Rabbanit. So now we're going to see a list. The first one's going to be very surprising. Other things you can't do on Yom Tov because it's not, as we like to say, in the spirit of Yom Tov. Ein hasuma yotzei b'maklo. A blind person can't walk out with his cane or her cane. Okay, this is very strange. What do you mean? So commentators obviously all say it's only if the person doesn't need the cane. If they need the cane, obviously they can walk out with it. It's only if they can live without it, then they should. They shouldn't use it. Below, again, you have to understand the reality a little better, and whether blind meant totally blind, partially right, and whether the stick was necessary, not necessary. Anyway, obviously, if it's necessary, one is allowed to. Below the satchel that the shepherd uses, he can't walk around with on Yontif, because again, it's like an everyday activity. Ve'ein yotzim b'kisei, you don't go out on a chair. They would carry people on chairs. You always see those Romans and old movies and stuff where they talk about that time period. They would carry people out on chairs. Echad ish, echad isha, whether it's man or woman, neither of them. We'll get to some distinctions, man and women, maybe later. Ini, is this really true? V'ashalach Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, he sent the following. Zaken echad haya b'shchunatenu, v'haya yotzei b'gludki shelo. There was an elderly person in our community. Elder often means also knowledgeable rabbi. And he would always go out in his chair. They would carry him around. They asked him, if the people need them, masses of people need him, right? He's an important rabbi, then yes, it's allowed. And they relied al divrei achai shakya. Okay, that's the person's name seemingly. Da'amal, I carry Rav Huna from this place to that place and from that place back to the other on a chair. But Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, he also said, I took Mar Shmuel, mishimsha l'tula, from the sun to the shade, umitula l'shimsha, from the shade to the sun, also on a chair. So here you see you can. So what did they answer? Oh, you can't compare these cases. Hatam kedamar tama, that second source that we just used to question, it said specifically what the reason is. Im ayu rabim tzrichim lo mutal. If many people need him, then it's allowed, but otherwise it's not allowed. Amalei Rav Nachman l'chama bar Ada shliach Tzion. He said to Chamar bar Ada, was a shliach from Israel. Ki salik lahatam. When you go up there, akif vizil asuma ditzur. Go around and go by the ladders of Tyre, which is in Lebanon, and I want you to. Why should you go there? It's a mountain range, it seems. Vizil legabe de Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi. Go to Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi Baalmine and ask him the following question: Ma'u kiseh ma atunbe? Can we carry someone on a chair? So in the meantime, before he got there, nach nafshei de Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi. He went to ask Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi a question, but he died in the meantime. Kisalik, when he went up there, when he went anyway to the area, eshkachele Rabbi Zreika. So he finds Rabbi Zreika instead. Amarle, he says to him, Kiseh ma'atumbe, can you carry someone in a chair? Amarle, hachiyama Rabbi Ami, ubavad shalei chatef. He said, Rabbi Ami said, you can, as long as you don't yichatef. Comes from the language of shoulder, right? Katef is a shoulder. So, ma'u ubavad shalei chatef. What does it mean though? Don't lichatef. Amar Rav Yosef berei derava ba'alonki. It means, okay, alunka in Hebrew is modern Hebrew, is a stretcher. Okay, what it means here, and in the Quran they have a footnote that says it either comes from the Iranian or the Persian, means to go up, but it's something they would carry on their shoulders like a stretcher. So you can't carry the chair or whatever it is on their shoulders. Some people say it's actually the chair on their shoulders, or it means if I put my arm and I put my hand on the next person's shoulder, and then we carry the person on our arms. Okay, that maybe that's what they mean. Somehow using your shoulders to carry someone. You can't do it like that, but you could do it like hold the chair in your hands. So now we're going to have an interesting question. Ini, is this really true? But Rav Nachman permitted Yalta. Remember the famous Yalta? She was the daughter of the Reish Galuta, a very respected woman. She was married to Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman permitted her to be carried out on this alunki, which seems to be a problem. So how could he have allowed that? So the answer, Shana Yalta de Be'ita. She was nervous. She was scared. She didn't want them carrying in her hands, right? When you're at the weddings and they pick up, right? The brides are always nervous on the chair, right? The grooms are not usually so nervous, but the brides are very nervous when you carry them on the chair. Everyone's holding the chair, it's not very stable. So here, she was scared. Some people say, by the way, it's all women were scared. Some people say, no, it was just Yalta, right? Maybe because she was so proper and whatever, she was uncomfortable on that chair. So they allowed her to be carried on the shoulder where it's more stable. Ini, now they ask another question, sorry. No, they just bring another case. They carried him on the Shabbat of the Regel, of the holiday, because they were also nervous. So they allowed them to do it on the shoulders. Some people say, no, it wasn't because they were nervous. It was mishum duchka de tzibur. There were so many people who came to listen to the lecture. So in order, if they had to carry them higher up so that they'd avoid the crowds, right? You think of a rock concert or something and all the people are trying to get at them. You have to avoid, so they carry them high up. So what do you see here before we finish up for today? You see that this issue of not in the spirit sort of is affected by all different things. It's not so black and white, which makes sense, right? It's more of a gray issue, and it sort of depends on the situation, how important it is, how necessary it is. Is it needed for the community? Is it they're scared and therefore we can do something to make them more comfortable, right? There's all different issues, but the basic issue is try to do things a little differently than you do it on a regular day if it's an activity that could be perceived as not really in the spirit of the holiday. With that, we will finish for today. Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov and Moadim L'Simcha to everyone.